So, this last week, I was watching a Netflix documentary. You know, that can be trouble. Anyway, it was called Minimalism. I was surprised because it was almost an hour and a half long. It should have been shorter, right? But then again, so should my podcast be shorter, but oh well. This is Jerry Rothhauser, by the way, for Spiritual Rants. Shameless promotion. Check out my blog and read the Bible. Read it. Like, read it all the way through. And you say, well, I don't understand it. Okay, then read my blog. It comes out every day. You can sign up for it. I don't collect names or I don't advertise. I don't make any money on it. I'd lose money on it because I'm a minimalist. We'll get into that. But it's at spiritualrants.com and you can find it. You found this podcast, you can find the blog. It can be really easy. All right, minimalism. So it was really interesting. I thought it was very interesting because it wasn't Christian at all. It wasn't biblical, really. I mean, it was biblical, but they didn't allude to the Bible at all. And it seems to be, and, you know, I don't want to just beat up on millennialists because, you know, I was young once, and I was sick of hearing about older people saying what was wrong with the younger generation. So it's easy to beat up on the younger generation. But here I go. The millennialists, they seem to be the one mostly are into minimalism. What is it? Well, for instance, there was one fella on there, very interesting. And he had gone up the ladder. In fact, he had gone up the stairs and the elevators in his building on Wall Street and got higher and higher up in the system, which was on the upper floors. And he was about to become like as high as he could be in his 20s. I don't know if it was a partner or whatever it was called, but he was up there and he was going to make a ton of money. A ton of money. And that's what he wanted to do. But then when he got there, it was empty. And when he got the news that he was going to achieve at that level, he went into his office. He was depressed. And he went to his boss and quit on Wall Street. And not only did he do that, he sold a lot of what he had because he was a minimalist. So other aspects of that are you can get a really thin house, not much of a house. It makes me wonder what happens in a storm. But anyway, you can get a really thin house, a minimalist house, and the desk will pull out of the wall. The toilet is almost under your desk or in the kitchen because it's all scrunched up. And you can get a scrunchy house like that. There was one guy in the flick, and he had everything he owned in 2 bags over his shoulder. And I wondered if it was a Gucci bag, though. The funny thing about this is I didn't see anyone from the ghetto that was into this. it was all like people who had made a lot of money found out it was an empty life and then sold off things. They probably had a bank account. I don't know. Maybe they just walk around with cash, but that would have been, probably a tragedy if they got mugged in New York. Anyway, it's a thing. It's minimalism. It's a thing. All right, why am I talking about that? Because we're on lucky scripture number 13, the last one. The last one. Now, I've already tackled this topic before, and I mentioned Matthew 6:33. I did that when I was talking about lucky scripture number 6 back on July 24th of this year. If you want to go back and find it, I was talking about Philippians 4:19. The topic was, do you have enough? So you can find that and listen to that, and I'll mention the same kinds of things as Matthew 6:33. What does Matthew 6:33 say? Well, it says, but seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you. I love that scripture. For years, right after I was saved and I found out what the scripture was about, I thought, well, I ought to pick one. And it was knocking me over the head. And it's from a great section of scripture in Matthew 6. That's the one where Jesus talked about the birds and how God takes care of them and that kind of thing. And then it's summed up in verse 33. Seek first his kingdom and his righteousness, and all these things will be added to you, which clothes and food. Now, it didn't say, by the way, luxury cars, a big apartment in New York, or a mansion, anything like that. It just is a promise for the basics, food, and in our case, we almost lost our house, but I'm not sure a house was guaranteed in that passage. We were able to keep our house when the economy was really bad and had a house or a ceiling over our head. Now, it's the next verse I want to talk about a little bit, verse 34 in Matthew 6. Do not worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow will care for itself. Each day has enough trouble of its own. And if you have a red letter New Testament, which I don't particularly recommend because I don't think Jesus' words were any more special than anything else in the New Testament, because he said all of it anyway. It all came from him. But this would have been in red letter, which meant that he spoke it. So they put it in red print. Not to worry. I remember years ago, one of my mentors was the president of a Christian school, and I had taught for him way back when. And I went to his house. I used to have lunch with him all the time, but then he was pretty much stuck in his house. So I went to see him, and I asked him about worry. And I said, is it okay to worry? And he said, you can, but it won't do you any good. That kind of sums everything up about worry. It was Philippians 4:19. That was lucky number 6, by the way, if you want to check it out. And this is what I found interesting about the minimalists is that the greatest minimalist of all time happened to be the author of Christianity. Well, before him, there was someone that pointed to him and was shouting and wore strange clothes and subsisted on honey. His name was John the Baptist. But then he was pointing to the greatest minimalist of all time, and I'm not sure the minimalists realize that. That was Jesus. Here's the description in Matthew 8:20. The foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. The Son of Man was Jesus. He didn't even have a ceiling over him. And then in Luke 9:58, it says, Jesus said to him, the foxes have holes and the birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. Does that sound familiar? Yeah, I just read it. Why is it in there twice? Well, as you study Scripture, things that repeat in Scripture are the most important. Jesus really didn't have anything when he was out preaching. He had nowhere even to lay his head, maybe like a rock, a rock somewhere. Well, I can sum everything up in what I call the idiot rule. You can find the idiot rule in just a few days ago in my blog, September 1st. You'll find the idiot rule, and you can read about it. What is the idiot rule? The idiot rule is when I worry about something, and I'm concerned, did God forget about me? Did he decide that he wasn't going to fulfill his promise, that he does for other people, but he's not going to do it for me? Is he going to provide for me? And maybe I even get upset. I used to, but not now because of the idiot rule. The idiot rule says that when I feel that way, if I start to get angry with God and question him, at the end, I have to remember that always I'm the idiot and God takes care of me. Recently, we had to junk a car, and I won't tell you the whole story, but it looked like it was going to be a tremendous loss on our part, not to mention that we lose a vehicle and transportation. And you know what? When the smoke cleared, my bowels were all twisted in a pretzel, and yet God came through in the end. He always does. That's the idiot rule. So meditate on that this week, and it's the last of all of the 13 lucky promises I'm presenting out of Scripture. Don't worry about anything. Each day has enough trouble of its own, and take care of whatever God gives you for that day. This is Jerry Rothhauser for Spiritual Rants, and I hope you'll be downloading next week.